Welcome to channel. Today, we explore story filled with unexpected twists. Please, subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin. It all began 6 years ago, purely by chance. I had recently settled into the quiet town of Maple Springs, which had a modest population of 376. I had just finished delivering another shipment of brand-name bandages, which needed sterilization before hitting the market. After confirming the delivery, I got a call from dispatch with a new assignment that would have me back home 2 days earlier than planned. Being one of the few drivers with a hazardous materials license, I was qualified to handle the task. The pickup location was only 30 minutes away, so I filled the tanks and made my way over. Once the load was secured, I set off. The destination was just an hour from home, and the job paid double the standard rate. Instead of sticking to the suggested route, I took a shortcut across the countryside, shaving off time and distance. With more than 6 hours to spare, I approached a stop at a crossroad, where a handwritten sign caught my eye, reading "For sale before the county claims it," with an arrow pointing to the right. Intrigued, I followed it. 2 more signs led me to a farmyard. They were an older couple, probably in their late 70s, who had retired due to age. Their land was leased to farmers in the area, but with rising prices, they had fallen behind on the taxes. They loved the farm and weren't ready to sell it and move to town, so they had to sell some land. I called my dad, who took over using the family trust. We purchased the farm at fair market value and allowed them to rent the house on a long-term lease with low rent. They were thrilled and said if I ever needed a favor, to give them a call. I had my dad cut out a separate 15 acres at the intersection off the original 240-acre farm. It was the perfect spot to build a convenience store and a gas station, as the nearest major town was about an hour's drive away. As soon as I left, I suggested to my dad that he come down and look at it and try to buy the adjoining land around the intersection as cheaply as he could. He did, and somehow we got 15 acres on each corner of the intersection. In looking for water, my father discovered the farm had an underground river running through it that could support the water needed for 60,000 people. He decided to tap into it to supply our new commercial operation. Just as I pulled in to do the drop-off, dispatch had another rush job, which I gladly took. It ended up that I got home at my normal time. 5 months later, I had dropped the load at 5 in the morning on that Wednesday, 12 hours ahead of time, and parked the truck and trailer in the company yard, picking up the keys to my newly painted old Ford truck from the dispatch office. I knew I would be raked over for breaking state and federal laws about driving hours in the near future. Because of a breakdown, I had been on the road for 16 days, which is why I had pushed to get home. That meant the person who replaced me had an extra 2 days off. The cab would be in the shop for an inspection and then ready to be used in a couple of hours. They wanted to make sure it had been repaired properly. The other driver would be informed to come in, and he would be on the road by 9. I had told my wife I would be home in time for supper tonight. Nina had claimed the children, and she was looking forward to seeing me. A while back, I had pulled the engine out of the old Ford truck because it was dead. I did the restorative work on the frame and body in my spare time, as the interior was still in good condition. Before I left on my last 3-week run, I had prepaid a local paint shop to paint every piece of metal exterior and interior. When they were done putting the interior back together, they were to call Morton's Auto to come and pick it up. After dropping in the new engine and checking everything out, Morton had left the truck keys with the dispatcher, knowing I would settle up when I got home. The paint job made the old truck look brand new. The old blue truck was now completely midnight black. Even the bumpers had new chrome. The word Ford was painted white on the tailgate, just like it was when it was original. It could now get collector plates if I wanted. I was arriving home 12 hours early and thought it would be a nice surprise for the wife. She didn't start work until 9, so I started up the truck and headed for home. I was looking forward to seeing the wife and our 2 daughters after being on the road for 16 days. It was now just about 8 when I drove down our street toward our home, only to discover a vehicle in our driveway that shouldn't be there. I knew right away whose vehicle it was. It was the owner of our transportation company's youngest son's pride and joy. When I was on the road, he was off, as we both shared the same company cab. We were, in many ways, complete opposites. He had the reputation of being the family's black sheep. He was known by most truckers as an unbelievable blowhard with a big mouth. I pulled off on the side of the road and just watched. I wanted to know why he was at our house and where my wife's car was. My heart was ripped apart as I saw my wife Nina and Jack Turner come out of the house with our 2 children ahead of them. In his right hand was a rig bag that us drivers always carried. It contained the basics we would need while on the road. Some other girls had missed the bus to school, so they were heading out to drop them off. I made a video of them all using my cell phone. I caught Nina and Steve stopping in a loving embrace behind the kids before loading the 2 children into the car. It made it clear that whatever was going on had been going on for quite a while. Nina and Steve did not seem worried about being caught in public. They looked like just another happy family. They drove right by me, completely oblivious to who I was. As I figured, my wife no longer recognized my restored truck, and since I was not due home, she was not looking for me. I watched them in my rearview mirror as they turned the corner. I pulled into our 3-bedroom house and prepared to see what else I could find. I found that our 2 children's bedrooms were like they always were. So was our master bedroom. My wife's clothing was where it should be. So was mine. Even our bed was made, which was a bit unusual because of the kids missing the bus. So far, nothing seemed out of place. If they had spent the night together, where were the remnants that would provide me the documented proof I now believed I needed? If they were not involved, then there was no reason for him to be here. I had gone through everything twice, but my gut still was telling me to keep looking. From the basement up, nothing stuck out. The dishwasher was full of dirty dishes and needed to be run. That was when I noticed a bit of light shining beneath the door to the unfinished 3rd floor. It struck me as funny because that shouldn't be. We had put up old curtains and kept them closed. It had become a type of attic where we stored things we no longer used. I hadn't been up there in years. My first thought was that Nina had been up there for some reason and forgot to turn off the light. Curiosity got me. I had to find out why there was light coming through beneath the door. I climbed the stairs and opened the door to discover the whole floor was now completely finished. I was shocked. The morning light was caused because someone had left a curtain open. When I was home, they were always closed. The problem was it was not even supposed to have been started because my loving wife Nina and I could not come to an agreement on what to do with it. I now knew why. Why was this room finished, and who was using it came into my mind. It had its own master bedroom larger than my wife and mine downstairs, huge walk-in closets on both sides of the master bath, and a separate sitting area with its own TV and DVD player. Sitting on a little table were some adult erotic movies that my wife would never watch or allow me to watch. Yet when I turned the TV on and hit play on the DVD remote, an adult video started playing. It was clear that someone had been watching it. I was stunned to learn that it was a homemade video of my wife masterfully giving someone a blowjob. It saddened me because it was something she would never do for me. It really surprised me to see how much my naked wife seemed to be enjoying it. When I had suggested trying that, she said it was disgusting. Across the room, sitting on a coffee table, was a handmade card that said, "We love you, Uncle Steve." It was signed by my 2 kids. I felt like I was going to throw up. My fear was now a reality. Not only was he my wife's lover, but it appeared that they were trying to take the kids from me. The king-size bed had been slept in and was not made up. A new set of baby dolls, which I had never seen before, were lying on the floor, which meant that this morning she'd been in too much of a rush. The bedroom reeked of stale sex, and checking out the walk-in closets, I found one side held clothing I assumed must be his because they were definitely too big for me. The other one held more female clothing, which I recognized as being some of hers. She had some very sensual evening wear hanging there that she had never worn for me. I no longer had any doubt Nina and Steve were lovers. I was beginning to see that there was another side to her personality that she had not allowed me to see. It made it clear that in her eyes, I had always been her second choice. What did my children know about all of this? Using my cell phone, I captured a video of everything I had discovered. I took great pains to hold a shirt of his and get a shot of me with it in the mirror to prove that it was just too big for me. What got my attention was a framed picture of him with his mother and father. I recorded everything about the room in detail, then I stopped and saved the recording. Seeing the television again, I rewound the disc and recorded the image on the TV, which showed a man holding Nina's head as he repeatedly drove his manhood into her mouth. Nina seemed to be enjoying being owned like a 304. The video proved she was his. His thrusts had her big jugs bouncing, reinforcing in my mind the force he was taking her with. I captured it as the recorder of the video moved the lens up the man's body to show the pleasure in his eyes. It was Jack Turner, my boss' son. This was the second clip I saved. I figured I now had all the evidence I needed. Going down to the basement, I grabbed our three-piece luggage set and proceeded to pack all my clothes. As an afterthought, I went back to the third floor to remove the disc that had their crudely shot sex video recorded on it. I packed it into one of the suitcases. When I was done, I set them by the front door. I would be back for them later. I had a few more important things to do. I called my father and asked him how soon we could get the new store up. He said he was already building it with a second story for a 3-bedroom apartment. He was looking at a regional manager to supervise the overall running of it. He said the chain I work with had granted us a franchise, which would really help us quite a bit. It would take another month and a half for it to be completed and a month after that to get it all set up. Why? He'll be running it, Dad, and living in the apartment. Find me a good civil attorney and one for divorce. I said I would talk to him a bit later on to give him the details about what was going on. I called the farmer who we had bought the farm from and asked him if I could rent a room from him until the construction was done. I got the room, but he said, "Your money isn't good enough." No matter how I tried, he refused to accept any money because he thought he and his wife owed my family big time. I said I would arrive sometime the next day. At 10 a.m., I was in the transportation center sitting in the boss office, informing him I was quitting without the usual notice. He just had to ask me why, and I really didn't enjoy having to tell him. I showed him the video of the room in general, and then the pictures I had taken afterward. The last one was of the framed photo of his wife and him together with their son, Steve. "Where did you get that?" Charles Turner asked. I explained that this was the third floor of my house, and it was not supposed to be finished. His face was as white as fresh fallen snow. Then I showed him the clip of his son, Steve, screwing the woman in the mouth as if he owned her. Joe, a Christian man, viewed it and said, "My God, that's sickening." I said, "The woman being taken in the mouth by your son is named Nina. That is why I am leaving her. Nina is my wife." That clip was created in a separate room on the third floor with a third person's help. I didn't know what to think, so I said I'm sorry. You see, because of your son's and my wife's conduct, I've been given no choice. I have to quit driving to have a chance of getting custody of my 2 daughters in the divorce. He called the accountant to make out my final check and to add a bonus of $9,000 because of what my son has done. Tell no one and get to my office as soon as possible. Are the children his or yours? Charles Turner asked seriously. They both look like Nina. I believe they are mine. I don't think the affair has been going on for a long time, I replied. We have been hearing things for a long time, Joe said. The only way to tell is to have DNA done. I suggest you get your son, Steve, to request it, I said with sadness. Please don't say anything to anybody. I want Nina to find out by herself tonight that I know what's going on. Just so you know, I don't approve of what my son has done. When he comes back in 2 weeks, he's gone. We have heard rumors for years that he was involved with a married woman who he was doing regularly behind her husband's back, but we had never had any proof. We just thought he was shooting his mouth off to other drivers, Joe solemnly said. Now I am so sorry that he did it to a good man like you. I never knew he had moved into your house. He continued, but both your jobs made it easy to see how it could go on for so long without anyone knowing. I would learn much later that Joe kept his word. Not only did he fire him, but he cut him out of his will because he had brought shame upon the family name by destroying another man's marriage. The thing Joe could not get over was that it was to one of his own long-term trusted employees. To him, it showed that his own son didn't give a damn about anything or anybody. After cashing the check, cleaning out all of our joint accounts, and paying my bill at Morton's Auto, I went to my children's elementary school. After talking to the guidance counselor for quite a while, the children were called out of class to talk to me. She started to leave to give us privacy. I said it might be best if you stay. I don't want to be in a position where I can be accused of trying to manipulate our children. She asked if I was that sure. I said in this case, yes, because my wife Nina is a social worker for the state. Miss Collins' eyes displayed her shock. I learned that their new Uncle Steve had been renting the upstairs for 3 years. He had originally kept his distance, but over time, he seemed to become part of the family. Nina had introduced him as a distant cousin who had just returned to the area. Although they had never caught them together, they had seen their mother coming downstairs in the morning, so much that they assumed they were sleeping together. Mom ended up demanding that we start calling him an uncle, Chloe said. I told them straightforward that he was no relation to either one of us. My daughters' faces showed their shock. I explained that Steve was apparently their mother's long-term lover. As a result, we would be getting a divorce. Since I was a trucker, I explained that there was no way I could ever get primary custody, which meant they would have to stay with their mother until I found a new job. Then I would go to court to try to get sole custody of them. The school counselor said that what I had explained was true. I kissed my daughters goodbye and watched them return to their grade 5 class. The school counselor gave me her name and phone number. Have your lawyer contact me so I can give a statement as to what I bore witness to, she said. I've seen too many married men get screwed over in their divorce. I hit a flower shop and asked for a bouquet of the deadest flowers they had. I wanted it packaged and boxed. I had to explain to them that it was a gag gift before they would do it. One of the staff went out to the garbage and brought some back. Will these do? She asked. I said, they're perfect. She boxed them up for me. Taking them back to her home, I laid them on her master bed along with the card my daughters had signed for Uncle Steve and her baby doll that I had cut up with her sewing scissors. I loaded up the tools I wanted to keep into the bed of my truck. After I loaded the suitcases, I threw on a tarp to cover what I was carrying and was tying it down tightly. The tools themselves were worth a lot of money. The neighbor, a real friend named Tom Wilson, walked over and said, I guess you didn't know about Nina's second husband, as we were all led to believe. Second husband? I questioned. In a common law way, John said. No, I just found out about him today. It's been going on for at least 3 years. We used to work for the same company. I quit today because I want sole custody of my daughters. Because I'll need to be able to prove to the court that I will be there for them every day. I said before I continued. When I was driving, he was not there. So there was no way of me knowing unless we were home at the same time, I explained. He's the boss' youngest son. His father found out today the hard way what was going on when I walked in and quit on him without notice. We talked a bit more, and he suggested I pull my truck from the driveway. He thought that by my observing her tonight, it might give me a glimpse of how I should plan for what would happen later. You can get up before daylight and head out in the darkness before dawn. I thought about it for a few minutes before I accepted it. I'm glad I did. I watched as my wife of 12 years pulled into the driveway. I guess the car had been in the shop getting serviced. She went into the bedroom as soon as she got in to get out of the dress clothes that she wore to work. It stopped her when she saw what was sitting on our bed. She was smiling because she thought it was a surprise gift from Steve. Looking through the binoculars, I got a close-up of the smile of joy appearing on her face. She took the kid's card to their Uncle Steve and set it aside. She reached for the baby doll and picked it up to find it was in pieces. It was a favorite of hers since she had bought it for Steve. She only wore it when she wanted him taking her tush. Why would he do that? Now her face was showing some concern. Why would Steve put it in Mark's bedroom? I could see doubt coming across her face. Brushing off the remaining pieces of the flower box, she opened it up. She was caught by the smell of 24 rotten red roses. For a minute, it looked like she was going to throw up. I could tell that she hadn't figured out that I had found out. The puzzled look told me she did not know what Steve was trying to say. I thought she might be thinking that Steve was ending their relationship. I watched my 2 daughters get off the bus to walk toward the front door. Emma texted me, saying, calling you, but don't answer with your voice. We want you to hear what we say to our mother. We decided that she needed to hear the truth as you taught us. I explained to our neighbor, John, what was about to happen when I put it on speaker. We will have to be quiet, I said, so we can both hear it. The girls went straight up to their mother's room, who was still trying to come to terms with what I had done. She still did not get the message I had sent. After greeting their mother normally, my daughter began to talk. Dad had us called out of class today, as he wanted to talk to us privately, Chloe started. I could see my daughter had gotten their mother's attention just by the look on her face. We were brought to the school counselor's office. We were puzzled why he was there. You said he would be home around 6. Then he asked Miss Collins to stay, Emma added. The first thing he asked us was, who is Uncle Steve, and how long has he been part of the household? I explained that he was a distant cousin of yours who had moved back into the area, Chloe told her. I could see the fear as it formed on Nina's face. She now knew who had left the message on the bed. Dad had no knowledge that you had the third floor finished while he was on the road. You told us it was a surprise for him, Emma disclosed. Now we understand that it wasn't. We kept our promise to keep your secret, and boy, was it ever a surprise to Dad, Chloe added. He told us that he didn't know about it being finished until today, Emma said. Mommy taught us not to lie, but I guess we have learned to understand that it's only okay for you to lie to everybody in the actual family. Nina started crying. I could see the tears flowing freely. Dad did not know about Uncle Steve renting the third floor from us for over 3 years, Chloe stated. We had to explain to him that while he was on the road, you never ever slept in the bed that you and Dad would sleep in when he was home. We knew that because it never needed to be made up before you left for work, Emma pointed out. Nina's face went pure white. Her own daughters had outed her because of her own conduct. The simplest thing, like a made-up bed, was bringing her down. She had always stressed that the girls make their bed before starting their day. We admitted to Dad that we never caught you with Uncle Steve, but we told him we did see you come downstairs regularly from the third floor in the morning when he was not home, Emma explained. Dad said that he and you would be getting a divorce because Steve is no relation. He's your mother's long-term lover that she has kept hidden from me. Dad said my wife and your mother has used me apparently for a long time to help support him in a lifestyle designed by them only to fulfill the needs of your mother and him, not for the benefit of us all. That tells me my life with her has been nothing but a lie. He told us that we would have to live with you until he finds a new job. He was going to start hunting because he quit today because he wants custody of us, Chloe added. Ms. Collins explained later that Dad had no choice but to quit his job because the court would not grant custody to a long-distance truck driver. After he said goodbye, we went back to class, Chloe explained. Nina was sitting on the bed, crying, trying to remain in control. She knew what the girls said was the truth. Mark was making the right move, preparing himself for the fight that was to come. Since she was a social worker, he knew well what the state would look at when the court orders them to give their evaluation. We ended up breaking down, so the school counselor had to pull us out of class for the rest of the day, Chloe said. We had a long conversation about it all as she tried to calm us down. We learned that sleeping with another man while married is adultery, Mother, Emma said. Miss Collins says it's the ultimate insult a couple who are married can give another. It appears that it doesn't bother you. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it, Chloe stated. Ms. Collins said she wondered why you thought you could get away with living with 2 husbands for so long, Emma said. I don't have 2 husbands. I have one, Mark, and a Livian lover. Then she saw it from the other side and mentally thought, that's how most see it. Mark, once knowing, because of his pride, has no choice but to file for divorce. In his eyes, she had been playing him like he was nothing but a sucker being used. Chloe and I had a long talk about you sleeping with another man and decided that you must not only hate Daddy but both of us too, because that's the only thing that might explain what you did or why you did it for so long, Emma said. Miss Collins said no human would do what you did to our father if they had any love or respect for them at all, Chloe said. Nina was crying so hard that her body was shaking. She had never expected to be caught or confronted by her daughters about it. Their words were strong and cut into her like a knife. Her own conduct had forced her daughters to grow up. Just before we got on the bus, Miss Collins asked us if we were all right emotionally to ride the bus. If not, she would gladly drive us home. I told her we were going to be fine because it would give us time to talk, Chloe said. Miss Collins told us that she was going to testify as to what she had heard today if she was asked to in court. She said she had no choice because she had seen too many men destroyed by the lies of another, added Emma. We did a lot of whispering to each other on the bus ride home, and we have decided a few things on our own, Chloe stated. Nina lost it totally and buried her head in her hands. Mom, we may only be 11 years old, but it won't be long until we are old enough to decide with whom we want to live. Miss Collins explained that at the age of 13, we can decide for ourselves with whom we want to reside. And that will be Dad, Emma stated forcefully. We are going down to call our grandmother to come and get us. I'm sure she'll let us stay with her and Grandpa until our father has figured things out. That way, you and Steve can have the whole house to yourselves, Emma said. Let go, sis. We gotta call Grandma and pack some clothes. Mother, One final question. Were you deliberately encouraging us to have a relationship with Uncle Steve to make it easy for us to accept him as your second husband without our father knowing? Chloe asked. Because it appears to the two of us that you were. Nina was devastated. She just sat there and cried as her daughters went down to call her mother, who lived across town. Her daughters had their father's natural insight. They had looked at everything with straight logic and had drawn out their own conclusions. I texted Nina, stating, "What you found on the bed was done by me. Let your common-law husband know I will be suing him for co-support of you and the two children." I watched through the binoculars, her coming to the realization that when I presented her lifestyle relationships, the lies, and the hiding of it to the court, she would lose all rights concerning her daughters. Nina realized she was defeated. There was no happy outcome with this. Mark suing and exposing Steve would ruin both of them. John and I timed it. It took less than 20 minutes before my in-law showed up. John opened his front door just to see if the voices would carry. They did because the voices were so loud they might have been screaming. My mother-in-law was ripping Nina a good one as she led her granddaughters out of the front door. But it was my father-in-law who put everything into a clear perspective in such a way that it left no doubt how he felt about his daughter's whole situation. I guess with you driving Mark out of your life, as soon as things settle between Steve and you will be looking for another long-distance driver to replace Mark, my father-in-law said in pure anger. Steve has already proved he thinks so little of you that he accepts you sharing yourself with others. You have made it clear by your conduct that just one man will never be enough to satisfy your sexual urges. John and I could see that Nina was devastated by her father's words. She was crying so hard she could not speak. We will be contacting child services in the morning to see how to proceed in this situation, Nina's mother said. After all, it was our granddaughters who contacted us and told us why they wanted out of this house. They have made me very proud. Someone has clearly raised them right, and sadly, we can't say it's you. John closed the door, walked into the kitchen, and grabbed a couple of cold beers. I followed him. Your daughters read the situation right, Mark. You should be proud, John said. To be honest, when the construction crew was working, Nina told us you were in need of money and were going to rent the third floor out. The house and land were paid for. I was just taking our time because we didn't need it, I explained. I had remodeled the house from the ground floor up, so we were lied to by her from day one. Steve and she had it all planned. So where did the money come from? John asked. Since we have not received 1 cent of income from day one for that so-called rental suite, I said, I presume it came from Steve's trust fund, and he's paid it back. I took my cell phone out, and I hit Nina's name on my contact list, and I hit text. John, let me know if you can spot Nina. I want to send a text, and I need to be told what her response is. A couple of minutes later, he said, got her. She's back in her bedroom and has appeared to have calmed down. I said, I sent it. It was short. It read, Hey 304, to all who come calling. Charles Turner and I both want to know because of the long-term length of your relationship with his son. Are Chloe and Emma minors? Joe is going to file a lawsuit to try to find out. Oh my God, she's lost it. She threw her phone at the wall, John said. Now she is lying face down on her bed, crying hysterically. John walked back into the kitchen and smiled. What did you text to her? I just said that Charles Turner, and I wanted to know if Chloe and Emma were Steve's or mine, I replied. Joe told me that he had been hearing rumors for years that his son was involved with a married woman and that the husband didn't know. As a result, I asked a question that needs to be answered for all concerned. John Smith's face went white. He knew the Mitchell reputation. Joe would go to the Supreme Court to find out what the truth was. I waited half an hour and asked John to observe Nina again. She was sitting on the living room sofa. I sent her the 5-minute clip of her giving head that I had recorded off of the TV, which ended up showing the man she was servicing's face. It was good old Uncle Steve with the question of who was filming this. I waited for a moment, then texted. I took the disc. When I get to watch it, maybe I will find out. John said, Nina has lost it again. I don't want to know what you said or did, but she threw up all over the living room rug. I left at 5 in the morning, heading out after I had sent what I had recorded the day before to everyone we knew, friend or foe, with a text that said, This is what I showed to Charles Turner when he asked why I had to quit. The second video was also originally filmed on that same floor as the bedroom with someone else's help. Neighbors have openly said that Jack Turner is Nina's second husband. Nina had told the neighbors that I had agreed to the arrangement. That is not true. I found out yesterday and I plan to file for divorce and to sue Jack Turner for numerous reasons. For most, it was not going to be a good start to their day. I stopped at the friendly truck stop just at the edge of town and ordered myself a trucker's breakfast. I had backed my truck into its parking spot and could see it out the window at my booth as I ate. I'm sorry, Mark. No man deserves what happened to you, Sophie, Nina's younger sister, said. May I join you? I nodded my head in the affirmative, so she sat down across from me. I slowly sipped on the hot coffee. Mom and Dad told me last night. The girls told them everything after they got them home. Just so you know, we all have been blindsided by this, Sophie explained. Please, if you change your phone number, let us know. We won't give it to Nina. The phone number will stay the same. Sophie, I said. I was going to be quitting in 3 months anyway because my girls are growing up and I wanted to be home at nights when they started their active teenage years. What was my sister thinking? Sophie let slip out. There is no way you would ever go along with Nina having a second husband. I don't think we will ever know, I replied. Perhaps it started out as an innocent friendship, but it gradually went to places it never should have. Either way, she seemed to be enjoying it as far as I can tell from what I have heard. It was going on a lot longer than the 3 years we found out about. What do you mean by that? Sophie asked. Charles Turner, when I disclosed why I was quitting, told me that there had been rumors that his youngest son had been involved with a married woman for years, I explained. He asked if Chloe and Emma were Steve's. Oh, who else knows? She asked. I opened my text messages to Nina and let her read what I had sent to her last night. Then I showed her what I had sent out this morning. By the time she was done viewing, she had to wipe her tear-stained eyes. What she knew was bad had just gotten a lot worse by what the video showed. Their relationship involved one other person. By the end of the day, everyone will know, I said. Joe will go public in his quest for the truth. It may end up that both are mine, or both are Steve's, or maybe neither of us is their biological father of any of them. The question I'm playing with now is whether the person making the video is male or female. Sophie, I guess, saw the tears in my eyes because she stood up and moved over beside me just to hold my hand. We didn't say a word until the waitress took our order. Finally, I had to let go of her hand so I could eat. Mark and Nina had married at 20. She was the youngest of the bridesmaids, but even at that age, she'd been infatuated with him. She thought he'd been so handsome back then and still, he drove a long-distance truck so Nina could continue her university education. When she graduated and got hired by the state, she was offered several locations but chose the one back in her hometown. Now she knew why. It was to be near her first love, Steve, whom their parents never approved of. Sophie looked at Mark and felt that he could not handle knowing that for now. When Mark was home, she spent as much of her free time with him as possible. Mark was an honest man who always treated her as an equal. When she was having difficulties, it was him she went to. He taught her to look at situations from all sides, making her big problems become small. It wasn't hard for her to fall in love with him. It was so real to her that every man who had tried to court her since had to meet the standards he set. Her parents were looking for her to marry, but Sophie could not tell them that she loved someone else and always had. He was a loyal man who had never looked at another woman. She just had to find a way to keep Mark in her life for now. When the time was right, she would make her move and prove to him forever that he had married the wrong sister. Mark, do you know where you will be living? Sophie asked. Chloe and Emma asked Mom and Dad to take them in. They're angry, upset, and determined, but are so proud of their father. The girls told Mom and Dad they will tell the court that they want to live with you, she said. Mom and Dad explained to them that you are doing what is right for the long term. I can bring them to you on the weekends so you can see them if you want. I opened up my notes and gave her the address of the farm. My dad and I have started building a gas bar and convenience store near this location. I will be staying with the renter of the farm we own, I said. I will have to check with them before I can give an answer to your question. We are putting a large 3-bedroom apartment on top in which I will live. Why out there? Sophie asked. We own 10 acres on each side of the intersection that we plan to subdivide and sell off as 34-acre lots after we have got it developed, I explained. If needed, we can take more of the farm as needed. There is nothing in the area, So the store will be a convenience for a lot and a drawing point. How did you find it? Sophie asked. According to Google Maps, there is nothing near there. I was cutting across the country to save time, I explained. There was a lot of traffic on the road. I noticed the sign at a four-way stop and followed it. The traffic flow would support the business. After we finished the meal, I picked up the ticket. Sophie leaned in and kissed me on the cheek like she always did. It made me smile. Keep in the back of your mind, Mark, Sophie said. There are a lot of us who have always loved you for being the man you are. While driving, I called my father and explained everything. He said he would give me one of the best divorce lawyers possible. I clocked the mileage to where I was going. It was only 90 miles. It was just after 9 when I arrived at the construction site. I smiled when I saw it because Dad was going big. It would have 8 pumps for passenger vehicles, 2 for small commercial trucks, and 2 for the big rigs on the far right side. The holes had been dug, and the blocks framed for the start of the spillage collection system in case the tanks ever started to leak. The floor and concrete needed for steel support had started. I got into the construction trailer and saw the design that Dad was working from. It was just like all his others, except for the 2,600-foot apartment on top. I smiled too because it meant he saw the potential of the area. After about 3 hours, I headed out to the farm. George Harris came out to greet me. He loved my restored old Ford truck. Those were the days when speed, weight, and hard metal were supreme. The missus was about to serve lunch, and I was told to come in. The missus, Bill called her, prepared a typical farmer lunch, and she was tickled pink by how much I ate. After the meal, I started to help her clean up while she put the leftovers away. I started the dishes. She noticed I was no longer wearing a wedding ring. By the time I had dried them and she had put them away, the fresh pot of perked coffee was ready. I spent the next 3 hours explaining how the last 2 days went. Bill said the girls and their aunt would be welcome here. It would be nice to have some young ones around again. It gives me someone to do some grilling for. I texted Sophie and said, you can come every Friday night and go home on Sunday. She texted back, it's a date. Wednesday afternoon, I reviewed the disc on my laptop and the whole shoot. It did not show another face. Using my cell phone as a Wi-Fi link, I sent my father everything, including the address and phone number of Ms. Collins. I told him to contact Charles Turner to get where Steve will be and when and have him served as soon as possible. Nina could be served at the social services office in town. I even sent the video file uploaded from the disc. In pure spite, I texted Nina to tell her I'd viewed the whole video and said it was not much to write home about. Other 304s had done better performances. Sophie was a tax specialist. Thankfully, it was the slowest part of the year. As soon as the girls got out of school, they were on the road. She had a laugh as they texted their father every 15 to 20 minutes. The 90-mile drive seemed to go quickly. When they reached the construction site, they texted one final time. They drove down the road until they saw him standing there at the end of the driveway, waiting for them. Chloe and Emma jumped out of Sophie's car and ran into my arms. Bill and the missus were introduced. I finally learned her name was Martha. The girls loved the room Martha had prepared for them. Bill had shown everybody their rooms while Martha finished preparing a huge dinner. When we were done with dinner, I started cleaning up. Martha watched as my daughters, and I did the dishes up so she could put them away. Bill told the girls about the huge swing set, the swimming pond, and the small motorcycles that they could learn to ride if I gave permission. I had been worried about what they would do, but Bill and Martha had it all figured out. After the kids went to bed for the night, Sophie and I got to talk. Mark, it's been a crazy couple of days. All hell's broken loose, Sophie said. Everything is coming out. Steve was the boy she snuck out to see as we were growing up. That is how long they have been involved with each other. That explains a lot, I said. I was safe and secure. Steve was the wild side that she secretly craved. She didn't know that he knew it, and he played it to his advantage. Steve will run and leave Nina with what she deserves nothing. Mom and Dad talked to child services, and if you give them your permission in writing, they will be allowed to keep them until you find a place, Sophie explained. They also talked to the kids in private, and afterward, we were all told that Nina, because of her lifestyle, had no way to recommend her getting custody. Sophie looked at me and saw the tears running down my face. It had finally hit me. I told her to go and let me work it out, but she refused and stayed with me. Nina was sitting at the kitchen table, reflecting on the last 2 days. Wednesday had been a quiet day. Today had been anything but. Charles Turner had served her while she was at work. He was taking her to court. He wanted to know if there was a direct DNA link between her daughters and him. The truth be known, it had been years since the twins were conceived. She no longer remembered. Mark had warned her the battle was coming, but after the initial shock, she had written it off as just anger. What had really taken her down was Mark's text message to all their friends and family. She had never seen Steve as her second husband, but as she learned from the lawyer today, legally he was. From the day she moved Steve into her house, he was in a common law relationship with her legally. After the first year, they had the same legal rights as a married couple. As a result, Mark was going to be successful when he sued Steve. That was as certain. The only question was how much he would be awarded. The lawyer said that Mark was going to be viewed very favorably in the divorce courts because he was being wronged for so long. If she had collected rent during the last 3 years and could prove it by monthly bank statements, things might have been different. As it was, there was no proof that he was contributing to anything in relation to the household expenses. Thus, the court would view him as being a kept man. It was just at closing that the real bombshell hit. Her supervisor called her into the office and laid it all out. She had gone out after hours on Wednesday to a Mr. and Mrs. Peter White's residence concerning a custody issue at their request. They explained what had transpired the night before and asked for the state's guidance going forward. After talking to the children involved, I told the grandparents that if they got written authority to look after the kids from the father, we would accept them as having temporary custody until the case is decided. I know they're your parents, her supervisor said. Nina, I can't transfer you at this time, but as soon as there is a spot available, I will. I can't terminate you or fire you, but your effectiveness as a social worker in this area is gone. No one would accept your word about anything you say, so you're permanently assigned to office work, and you have to turn over your current caseload to others, she said with disgust. Nina understood. She had nobody to blame but herself. It had been her choice, and her choice alone, to keep chasing Steve. It was finally hitting her that there were consequences for everything we did. It had been a busy Saturday. Chloe and Emma had been geared up. It was a hoot listening to Bill explain to my daughters the dos and don'ts about the small motorcycles that were standing beside them. It was amazing to watch as they took to it. After 3 hours, Bill said that was enough for the day because their bodies were going to be stiff and sore. Seeing they were sweaty, he said, "Go throw yourselves in the pond for a quick dip." Martha and Sophie were drawing closer. About 4, the girls were called in to help prepare part of supper. I had to check up on them because it was something they had never done. The 4 ladies were at the kitchen table, cutting onions for 2 dishes and peeling hot-boiled potatoes to make potato salad. Bill started warming his barbecue up, getting ready to cook the steaks he had thought of. I assisted him where I could. We ate the steaks, potato salad, and baked beans outside at the picnic table. It was interesting that neither the TV nor their cell phones had been used once all day. It was like the twins were discovering a whole new life. It was the girls who decided they wanted to go to bed early because they were tired. The 4 of us sat and had a few beers as we played cards until we called it a night. Sunday, after lunch, they headed for home. Sophie had got a handwritten letter, witnessed by Bill and Martha, giving them the permissions they required. Peter White called me early Monday morning to thank me for getting the letter back to him as quickly as possible. He had taken it personally into the office. The supervisor copied it for their records and then gave him a legal notice to show all concerned that they were the legal custodians of their granddaughter. We got into the history of his daughter and Steve. I ended up learning a lot of things I didn't know about. The following Friday morning, Jack Turner was in Denver, Colorado, picking up a load of sterilized medical equipment when he got served. That same morning, just after the social services office opened, Nina Mitchell got served. I got a text message from Sophie asking me for my waist measurements. I asked why. She responded, "So we can go swimming in the pond with the kids." I texted back, 34. I was taking a walk in the early afternoon when the cell phone notifications buzzed. It was a text from Nina. It read, "Have you calmed down enough to talk?" I responded, "Nothing to talk about. Your parents and Sophie have told me the history from sneaking out to meet him to now. What I'm trying to answer for myself is, if he has always been your one, why did you marry me?" Not surprisingly, I got no further response. I don't know who was more excited when Sophie pulled in with the kids, the three of us or the three of them. Sophie looked absolutely stunning. Her smile alone was contagious. After hugging me, the girls asked me a question quietly, to which I answered, yes, but only if they agree. As they headed over to greet Bill and Martha, Sophie kissed me firmly on the lips, taking me by surprise. I told Sophie she had to hear the girls, so we turned to their direction. Somehow, Sophie slipped her hand into mine. We were wondering, Emma said, if it would be all right for us to call you Grandpa and Grandma, Chloe added. Of course, they said, okay. But what surprised us was that Martha got teary-eyed. We learned later that they had no children because she had never been able to conceive. That simple request from my daughters were words she thought she would never hear in her life. After dinner, I told Sophie it was confirmed that both Nina and Jack Turner had been served. Then I showed her my last message from Nina and my response. You know my sister can't explain her actions, Sophie said, because if she did, she would have to admit the truth about herself to herself. Enough of your sister, Sophie, I replied. When are you going to find a man capable of loving you as you deserve? Don't be surprised. But I already found him, she responded. My problem is getting him to realize it. Bill and I were both early risers, so we were sitting outside enjoying a freshly perked cup of coffee first thing in the morning. Martha is my second wife, he said. I was first married to her sister, who did me wrong much as Nina did to you. You're telling me why? I asked. Don't let your hurt keep you from seeing what's in front of you. Sophie has been there for you since day one. When you're ready, be sure to ask yourself why. It was then that I started to clue in. Sophie was a best friend. Did she want more? If she did, why? Bill, what made you realize that Martha was interested in you? I asked. A cast iron frying pan over my head. He laughed. After she caught a neighbor girl trying to flirt with me. Since we could not have kids of our own, we took in foster children for years. Our conversation ended because we heard voices as the rest of the household was coming alive. After the twins rode the motorcycles for 3 hours, it was time to go for a swim. So we all went. Bill and Martha brought down the lawn chairs to watch us play with the beach ball for a while. Sophie looked stunning in her white bikini with her auburn hair pinned back behind her ears. Her full, ripe jugs bouncing as she tried to hit the ball back. She couldn't help getting my attention. The way she walked in bare feet caused a slight wiggle in her tush. I had my eyes on it as we walked down to the pond. Bill had got me looking at her in a different way. The pond was deeper than I figured and fed by a small creek. He had created it using railroad ties in a low section of the land. As a result, it had its own little waterfall. Our first game of beach ball volleyball was one adult with one child, then the 2 girls against us. For the 4 of us, it was a time of laughter, sarcasm, and just plain fun. It was nice just being us. Each of my daughters took turns having me dive under them, then lifting them up so they could dive off of my shoulders. Finally, Bill and Martha said they were going to go start supper. Chloe and Emma decided to go to help them. I dived under the water and came up between Sophie's legs, flipping her over. She laughed as she came up with her hair completely wet. Then she moved into me. Looking into her eyes, I saw what they showed for the first time. Not saying a word, I lowered my head towards her as she raised hers to mine. As we shared our first sensual kiss, I realized there was more love shared in that kiss than I ever had with Nina. Wow, I said. That was intense. Sophie smiled and said, You don't know how long I waited for this. She moved in so I could hold her tight. Our bodies pressed together tightly with the water around us up to our necks. Our mouths searching out each other in sheer delight. Our tongues searching each other's mouths out, creating our own unique dance. We were oblivious to anything around us. Finally, we broke it off when we heard Bill yell, Supper will be ready in 20 minutes. We broke it off and headed back to get changed for dinner. As soon as we entered the house, Martha knew. Looks like it's starting to work out. How did you clue him in? Martha asked with a big grin. She didn't. I told Mark about your wicked right with the cast iron frying pan, Bill said with a chuckle. The twins heard him say it, and he had to tell them the story of how they had gotten together. It was after supper when the twins had gone to bed. The fresh air and being out in the country were wearing them out. I was sitting on the back porch on a pillowed swing when Sophie came out and sat down beside me. I put my arm around her as she leaned against me and said, Mother figured it out when I brought the twins home last week to her. I seemed happier than I had in years. I guess my poker face wasn't as good as I thought. How did she take it? I said. There must be a lot of concern considering all that's going on. She asked if it had reached the point that there was something going on, Sophie said. I honestly told her no. Then she said, "How long have you been in love with him?" I said, "Since the summer before they got married." Wow, that long? And it takes all this for me to notice, I said. I was expecting a great big lecture from her, Sophie said. All she said was, "If it works out, I will get your dad to accept it." Then she explained that our dad had been her older sister's throwaway. She thanks her for that every day. I was kissing Sophie goodbye on Sunday afternoon when Emma said to Chloe, who appeared to be shocked, "Aunt Sophie has been in love with Dad for years." It took what Mom did to Dad for him to figure it out. If Sophie gets her way, they will be married as soon as he's divorced. As they drove away, I found myself asking, "How did my daughter know?" "Mark," Bill said, "let's go for a little walk. I got an idea to throw at you." We walked off the front of the property to the road, over the bridge that covered the small creek, to the other side of the property. There was a nice section of land that was originally part of the house area. "This would be a perfect spot for a house, don't you think?" Bill said. "That way, Emma and Chloe could come over whenever they wanted to ride the bikes or the horses." "We're buying." "Whose idea was this?" I asked. "Martha and Sophie's early this morning," he laughed. "They're going to spring the idea on you next week." Claus called me first thing Monday morning. Charles Turner had gotten a court order for blood to be drawn on Emma and Chloe. I had to explain to him what I knew. He was devastated to learn there was a question of paternity. Until then, he believed that Nina had just been involved with him for the last 3 years. He was so upset with the revelation that he walked into social services and told his daughter in front of everybody that as far as he was concerned, she was dead in his eyes. I talked to my mother-in-law, who informed me that Ms. Collins had provided a notarized statement for my lawyer. "Steve is due back in town on Wednesday. Do you think you should be around to see what's going on? You could stay here." I told her I would think about it. I called Tom Wilson and inquired if I could slip in and stay at his house on Tuesday night. He said sure because he had some things to share with me. Bill suggested I take his vehicle so that nobody would recognize it. I said I would, but only if he took the truck and took his wife out for a day on the town. He laughed and said, "You're pretty smart for a young fella." Dusk had already settled when I slipped into town. I called John to make sure he was home before I pulled into his driveway. It seemed that Nina had another gentleman caller at the house regularly since I had left. He was over at the house right then. When I looked through John's binoculars, I recognized the face instantly. It was Steve's older married brother. Charles Turner was surprised to hear from me. I said I needed to see him and gave him the address I was staying at. When he showed up, I gave him the key to my house, telling him he had to see it to believe what I had found out. I told him I had discovered who the one filming Steve and Nina was. They were currently together in the third-floor bedroom. John and I watched him walk over to my front door. Using the key, he walked in. "What do you think he's going to do when he finds out who he is?" John asked. "Charles Turner is a proud man. It all depends on what his pride pushes him to do," I responded. "I just hope it doesn't push him past the breaking point." We were just sitting in the kitchen when we heard the sound of a gun firing. We feared the worst. John called 911. When the police, fire department, and an ambulance showed up, we went outside and watched. John and I could not stop laughing. To us, it was a hoot seeing Nina half-naked and Charles Turner's brother in cuffs. We got concerned when we saw Charles Turner coming out being carried on a cot. John pulled out the police scanner and set it up. We learned that Joe had busted into the third-floor bedroom, and Joe's brother had shot him, thinking it was a home burglary happening. Joe was being transported with a shoulder injury. We stepped back outside to be noticed by Nina, who now had some clothing on. She looked at me standing across the street, and her face went white. Things for her had gone from bad to worse. John said to me, "I can't believe that she was involved with both brothers." I said I knew there had been a third person, but I did not know who. "I feel sorry for Joe. He doesn't deserve this." No one does. At 6 Wednesday morning, I pulled into my in-laws' place. Peter White was already up preparing for the day. He had the door open before I got out of the truck. Over coffee, before anyone else got up, I broke the news to him about what had happened last night. Mary, his wife, was stunned to see me but gave me a big hug anyway. It wasn't long until my daughters were down, fully dressed. Both were thrilled to see me. Of course, I drove them to school before returning to the in-laws' residence. Claus had gone to work. Mary and I had a long talk about both her daughters. She and I both came to the same conclusion that Nina had never loved me at all. I went to see Charles Turner, who was resting with his wife near his side. When she was introduced to me, she stood up and started choking up as I took her into my arms. Joe heard me tell her not to feel responsible for the stupidity of their kids. Joe smiled and said, "Mark has always taken things in stride. One thing I can say is that I've never seen him lose his temper." "I've come close to it a few times," I said. "I thought if I ever lost it, I would kill someone." Joe laughed. "Steve is in jail. His brother is facing bankruptcy since he's lost his trust. We don't know what his brother's wife is going to do. It's a real mess. And then there's you. Do you want to come back as management?" I had to refuse because, as I tried to explain, I had developed a new attitude towards life. I went to the transportation center and watched as Steve got signed in and signed out for the last time. Jason told me he was doing about one. Watching him drive off in anger was a real hoot. Knowing his explosive nature, I called Tom Wilson, asking him to watch my house because I expected trouble. Sophie was just shutting down for the night when the receptionist came into her office. "You have a nice-looking gentleman asking for you. He's holding a dozen red roses," she said. "He wants to know if you would like to go out for dinner." Sophie followed her out, wondering who it could be. If I had any doubt about how Sophie felt, it was erased when she saw me. Those tears forming in her eyes showed it all. I followed her to her apartment. Then, after she had parked, we headed to Steakhouse Grill for their steak and shrimp special. We nibbled on their blooming onion while we had a couple of cocktails. We had just finished our meal when John phoned. Steve had gotten home before Nina and was waiting for her. The booze he had drunk while waiting for her had only fueled his anger. With his father in the hospital, his brother in jail, and having just lost his job, he had come to the conclusion that it was all Nina's fault. He was waiting for her with a gun in his hand when she came through the door. The neighbor, hearing the firing of a gun repeatedly, called the police. Nina was in bad shape and was being rushed to emergency. John said it did not look good. I informed Sophie, who called her mother and father. We met them at the hospital. We learned 7 hours later that she died on the operating table. There had been just too much internal bleeding. I called Bill and Martha to inform them what was going on and that I would be driving out on Friday to return his vehicle and pick up my truck. It was hard telling the twins about the death of their mother. Claus and I decided on a closed coffin as we picked it out. It was to think because of the conduct of one, many lives had been changed forever. No one ever thinks there are consequences for our actions. We were walking back from the burial site when Claus took me aside. "Mark, there is no relationship between Charles Turner and the kids," Claus said softly. "More importantly, how long has Sophie been in love with you?" "According to your wife, since the summer before Nina and I married," I replied. "Did she also tell you that her sister threw me away over 36 years ago?" Claus said, "I'm still grateful to this day that she did. If you and Sophie work it out, you got my support." That was the moment I started rebuilding my life. It's been 6 years. I watched Chloe and Emma waiting for the bus. Sophie, my wife, is busy with our 2 preschoolers, both boys. Bill and Martha have become doting grandparents. The gas station and convenience store have become the center of the village. We now have our own post office. In warm weather, I walk from the house we built beside the pond and to work. Charles Turner and his wife come by often. His oldest son's ex-wife lives here with their kids. Steve got 12 to 30 years for involuntary manslaughter. His brother ended up being pled down to a misdemeanor. As for the name of our section of the world, it came about because Bill painted a sign that said, "We are all here because of circumstances," and stuck it at the 4 corners. Thanks for watching. Mark's story had some shocking twists. What would you have done in his place? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.